will forever be a legend here at Tottenham. It's a massive club. Everything I do is for the long term.
And still Ricky Villa. What a fantastic run. He scored.
Gascoigne going to have a crack. He is, you know. Oh, he's there.
Here's Lucas Moura. Oh, they've done it. The wait for silverware is over.
Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to the post-PSG edition of the Tottenham Way podcast. I'm Marcus Buckland, in the company of Tom Barclay from The Sun, who is still in his Paris hotel, having some café au lait and generally reflecting on what was a really frantic 90 minutes. At times, I think it's fair to say it was fabulous. Defensively, at times, it was immensely frustrating. Overall, I certainly feel that it was a step in the right direction, certainly after the horrors of that 90-minute performance against Arsenal at the weekend, though clearly there are still plenty of issues to resolve, and we'll look at some of those over the next 40 minutes or so. I mean, Tom, first things first, what's your assessment of those 90 minutes?
Yeah, Marcus. Pretty similar to you. First things first, it wasn't boring. That was the first thing to tick off the list after some of the very insipid performances under Thomas Frank, particularly at home. Obviously, it was an away game. I mean, I don't know if you saw that stat of the worst XG performances in the Premier League this season, and Tottenham have three of the top five, or the worst five. So that sort of underlines where the fans' frustration has come from, really. So I think what most fans wanted to see going into this game was some attacking intent, some goals, ideally, some reason to sort of believe and capture the imagination. I don't think many fans would have seen going to the reigning champions of the Champions League as a place where they were likely to get a result, even though they pushed them very far in the Super Cup and were unlucky to lose in that game. Albeit, I suppose PSG had only trained for a few days before that one, as opposed to Spurs having a full pre-season. And so with that in mind, and I think the context is key, given how atrocious they were against Arsenal and Chelsea and other games this season, that despite conceding 5, overall, I'm actually more positive in this performance. I think PSG were absolutely ruthless. I mean, talking about XG, if you look at it, actually Spurs had a better XG if you believe in all these kind of stats and the importance of them. Obviously, that's not the main thing. What really matters is the goals that go in and don't go in. But it is generally over the course of the season, I believe, is a bit of a an indicator of the trends that a team has and how they're playing. And I think that sort of shows the fact that they caused a threat, and they generally often limited PSG's chances, which sounds crazy saying it because I keep seeing 5. I mean, one of the ironies I find is that Thomas Frank hates his team to shoot from range. Generally, doesn't see like the sort of the statistical merit in it, because it just doesn't happen very often, and yet they keep conceding from outside the box at the moment.
I know,
but overall, I actually think positive. I know that will be divisive amongst the fan base. I feel like, basically, I'll put it this way: I feel like if you're a fan who's already of the mindset that Thomas Frank isn't the long-term answer, you'll probably use the scoreline from this game as further evidence of him being out of his depth, or however you might phrase it. And if you're the other way and want to give him time, you'll look at the performance and see positives in it to have cause for optimism going forward.
Yeah, I mean, I am absolutely in that camp of thinking there was real signs of encouragement. I mean, the moment I looked at the starting 11, and it was fascinating because, as I think we all know, you get the 11, and then you spend 10 or 15 minutes trying to work out exactly who is going to play where. Is he operating in the back 5? That's what UEFA, when they gave their team sheets out, were indicating. But obviously it wasn't. In the end, it was effectively a 4-2-2-2, which I think straight away helped Richarlison, who, by the way, seems to save some of his best performances for the very best opposition. He was outstanding against PSG in the Super Cup. And I thought he did really well again last night. He's now scored 3 in 3 alongside Randall Kolo Muani, and we'll come on to him in more detail. But obviously that was his best game for the club. The other huge plus for me was the performance of the 2 teenagers. And I'm afraid that there is no excuse from now on. If they're fit, Bergvall and Gray must have a place in Thomas Frank's starting 11 week in, week out. Though the other thing I'll say about the starting 11 as well is that to me, it seemed as though Thomas Frank had a little bit of an eye on Saturday's game against Fulham as well, because you look at the bench last night, and there's Kudos, there's Xavi, there's Polinia, there's Odobert, and there is Udogi. Johnson was suspended as well, which again, to me, just highlights there is some strength in depth in this squad, and that's without mentioning the players who are injured. And more than anything for me, Tom, that formation last night, the performance last night, does suggest to me that Thomas Frank is learning, he is listening to the fans, and he most definitely deserves a fair bit more time to try and get things right.
Yeah, I mean, I think that anyway, because he's 4 months into a job. I think if it was anyone, unless they'd lost all their matches, I feel that they need to have time to implement their ideas. But the sort of words that he came to after the games, he talks about the aggressivity, I think is the word where he puts it, aggression of his team, the intensity of going man to man throughout the game. In fact, we spoke to Archie Gray after the game as well. He talks about that man to man strategy of tactics. He talks about intensity, character and soul, he said, about this Tottenham side. So he was using all the buzzwords, but I can see why, just in the way that they set up and they really went after PSG. It's just the kind of performance, the kind of approach that Thomas Frank prides himself on and always did at Brentford, and hasn't seen as much of late at Tottenham. And that's what's been so disappointing, is the lack of intensity. Like, you can talk about, direct football. I mean, yesterday there was still lots of, big kicks up the pitch from Vicario or Van de Ven taking a goal at one point. So I don't think that's going to change. But I don't think all of that's fine, as long as there's a sort of thrill factor and an intensity to the performance. When it comes to the team sheet, I do think Spurs do. I'm not quite sure about this, but I imagine they enjoy giving UEFA the lineup to in a particular formation to sort of throw people off the scent, because they suggested a back five. I don't think that was ever going to be the case with Gray anyway, when he had Danzo on the bench, albeit I suppose Danzo will be playing at the weekend because Romero suspended. And then it was, effectively either a 4-2-2-2 or even an old school 4-4-2, wasn't it? Except not with wingers. Bergvall and Sarr were more sort of wide midfielders, and sometimes one would go forward, and one would go back. And it was interesting. Bergvall, Sarr, and Gray. That was only the second time this season they've started a game together. The first one being Burnley, which obviously was a pretty good win. It was the first game of the season when they won 3-0. To be fair to Frank, Bergvall in the last few games has missed out because of concussion. Gray obviously picked up that injury against Monaco, so he's been deprived of these players. He may well have tried to go with them earlier. And this will probably be touching on maybe a bit of a Fulham preview towards the end of the pod, but he suddenly has got a lot of options. And with Xavi not even being able to get in the team, and you're thinking, well, at home to Fulham, surely you want your most creative player in there. The performances of Bergvall and Gray last night, as you just alluded to, they've got to start. Suddenly, he's got a bit of a headache in the midfield, and that's very welcome after the last weekend.
It most certainly is. We'd love to get your thoughts, by the way. Do get in touch. There's a variety of different ways in which you can do so. If you're watching us on YouTube, by the way, please give us a like and a subscribe, because that always helps. If you're listening to us, then please try us on YouTube. I've even invested in a little light that Tom B recommended a few weeks ago, and I think it's working absolutely fantastically. Our channel on YouTube is the Tottenham Way. If you want to get in touch with any comments or questions, which we particularly appreciate, email the Tottenham Way Pod at gmail.com, the Tottenham Way Pod at gmail.com. You can get in touch with us on Instagram, on X, on Facebook, which Tom B is in charge of. It's going brilliantly, apparently. And
be very kind, Marcus. We have no followers so far, so please check it out. Give us a like. You can also on that front, Spotify now, we can actually stream our videos on there. So if you like, Spotify's your thing, that's one. And I've actually noticed quite a lot of comments coming on there. So I think, Marcus, you're about to say about getting the comments in. I think we're going to start doing every month, like we have done for the last couple of months, a Q&A pod. So we'll do one in December. They seem to be quite popular. So I think we'd really love to hear, particularly off the back of this game, and kind of what I was suggesting a minute ago about how if kind of depends what kind of fan you're at with Thomas Frank, whether you saw this as like evidence of him being out of his depth or evidence of things are going to get better. we'd love to hear your thoughts, particularly going into that Q&A podcast. So send them
Yes.
to all those various places.
And TikTok, please, and TikTok at Tottenham Way Podcast. Well, we touched on the brilliance of Gray and Bergvall, and Sarr to a degree. The one I'll come on to this in a minute. I mean, listen, we can be ultra critical. I sometimes feel that Thomas Frank waits too long to make his substitutions. But let's just talk about Randall Kolo Muani up against his parent club. He's had all sorts of problems since he's joined Spurs: the dead leg, then the fractured jaw. But he's playing with the mask, and he played really well last night. Scored twice. Is this the moment? Do you feel that he has really announced himself for certainly the short term? Who knows? Maybe the long term answer to Tottenham's goal drought as far as their strikers are concerned.
Yeah, I certainly hope so. I really like Randall Kolo Muani. Even before he scored, I think he's technically a much better footballer than Richarlison. Richarlison has his strengths as much as he can be derided. I mean, I feel for any striker who, at times in the last few games, has had to try and control these booming balls up top, particularly when he's playing against the likes of Saliba in the last game, and somehow trying to win a free kick and win a throw, which seemed to be the tactic against Arsenal. It's not easy, but actually he actually deals with it better than people sort of give him credit for. And he also talks about the fact that he's scoring goals at the moment as well. But Muani, for me, is a much more graceful player, a much more elegant first touch. Links play really nicely. I think we've seen that in a handful of performances so far, but obviously injury. It's such a classic Spurs, isn't it? The player, if you look at his injury history, Muani basically never been injured properly in his career, and as soon as he gets here, has a dead leg for about a month, then a fractured jaw. But to be fair, a fractured jaw sounds pretty serious, and he's actually straight back playing, so fair play to him. But last night against his parent club, not the first player in the Champions League to haunt his parent club, although I suppose Spurs didn't win the game. There's a number of players, Morientes back in. Do you remember Morientes when Mourinho won with Porto?
Oh yeah,
like Monaco in the final. I think the quarters they beat Real Madrid, and Morientes scored against them both legs. So there is sort of precedent there for that rule, which we don't really see in the Premier League. But yeah, I mean, first of all, the assist he got was a really nice one for the goal. I mean, the first goal from Richarlison is a lovely move, isn't it? I mean, Bergvall, a brilliant bit of skill. Gray with his head up, clips the ball to the far post. There's Muani, who also has the presence of mind to head it back across goal, and Richarlison can't miss. It was a really, really good goal, I thought. And then the other two, the volley for his first one is a really well struck hit. Again, a good set piece from Spurs, causing problems where Pore slings in the corner. Richarlison gets his head on it. Gray does really well with the flick. William Pacho is a fantastic defender, just about clears it, but then Muani absolutely smashes it home. And then Vitinha, who afterwards Frank called the best midfielder in the world and going to be the next Ballon d'Or winner, and you can totally understand why, given his hat-trick performance. But the one misstep he had in the game, he obviously loses the ball. Muani makes him pay with a fantastic finish. And if we can see more of that, he can stay fit. And interestingly, having the two strikers, I thought worked really well.
Yeah.
Once again, Thomas the Tinkerman, he changes up his formations, his lineups. It's hard to call it, but when it works well, it's really enjoyable trying to work out what he's doing and where he's going to go with it. And I really feel, Muani could be, if he can stay fit, a real answer to Tottenham's problems up top.
Yeah, no, it was really exciting. I'd agree with you. Having two strikers. I mean, I go back to the good old days when you had Keenan Berbatov and you had Archibald and Crooks. I love having two strikers. It takes a bit of the pressure off, and it definitely worked. I mean, there were times last night I was really enjoying the game when I wasn't screaming at some of the defending. But every time it cut away to the dugout, I was half expecting to see Ange Postecoglou sitting there. Thomas Frank's been kidnapped and Postecoglou's taken over, because it was that sort of performance. But as good as they were going forward, Tom, and I also agree with you, for long periods they seem to contain PSG as well, and yet the hosts score 5 times, which of course means that Spurs have now conceded 9 in 2 games. And you look at some of the goals. Well, first of all, I saw the quote from Thomas Frank saying that Vitinha's the best midfield player in the world, but I'm thinking, well, he wouldn't select him because the man has the audacity to shoot from distance. Oh, no, we don't do that at Tottenham. But I mean, his finishing was great, although I think, okay, he scores 1-1 the goal just before half time. Don't give him an opportunity to shoot from distance again for his second. In no particular order, the penalty, it's frustrating, but in the current climate, that's going to be a penalty. It was a really difficult night for Romero. Maybe we'll talk about him in just a moment. What a mess the goal, the fourth goal, was it the Pachos goal? I mean, what I'm trying to say is that it's, there were real signs of encouragement, but to be as sloppy as Spurs were defensively at times was frustrating. I don't know where the blame lies. I don't know what Thomas Frank does about that, but they almost really gifted PSG. I'd say 3 of their 5 goals.
Yeah, maybe. I think you're right to bring up Ange, to be honest, because as much as Tom A will cringe at Ange being brought up again in a podcast, but I mean there's a lot of I can already hear the comments coming in off the back of this podcast of how positive we're being when probably you more than anyone, Marcus, if it had been Ange, would have been absolutely lambasting the defensive side of the performance as Postecoglou's fault. So I think that's fair to not have double standards in that sense. But actually, yes, they made mistakes for particularly the fourth goal. The third goal, Romero put Sarr under pressure with a necessary risky pass. Sarr probably could have done better. Maybe it's a foul, but that'd be pretty soft. But to be honest, that third goal almost sums up the point I'm trying to make. I just thought PSG was so ruthless. Yeah, Spurs didn't help themselves, but the way when Hernandez wins that ball of Sarr, the speed of thought from Joao Neves to play in Fabian Ruiz, whose strike is just absolutely on point. Like it's just the best of the best, isn't it? And that's how you get punished. But actually, when you look at the game overall and the stats, Spurs didn't do that bad. Despite it sounds mad because they conceded 5, but they actually limited PSG. It wasn't like Arsenal. It wasn't like some of the other games, like even Bournemouth or Chelsea, which really should have been 3 or 4-0, but were only 1-0, where they were getting battered and offered nothing going forward. They just every time PSG seemed to have a chance, they seem to take it. I do agree with you though about Vitinha. And it's a bit of a trend from a defensive point of view is players being allowed to have sort of shots from just outside the box. We saw it with Eze at the weekend with Arsenal, or whether it's just inside the box, but being around those positions, they seem to have a bit of a problem with closing teams down in that, and they're getting punished by these absolutely top class players. And as I said at the start, and you just sort of mentioned there's an irony there because Frank doesn't really like his players from shooting from distance. Richarlison scored one of the goals of the season from distance the other day. So there are definitely issues, and I think that's kind of what I'm trying to stress from this overall podcast is that as someone who's objective, I suppose I want it to work. So maybe I am slightly biased in that sense, but I'm not a Spurs fan. I feel it's mad to just keep lurching from side to side. I think there were reasons to be optimistic, but that doesn't mean there weren't issues that definitely still need ironing out.
Yeah, I mean, no, because just looking at the first goal is a wonderful strike. It's just such a shame that it comes a minute before half time, and obviously that changes the team talk of both the managers. And then Spurs get their nose in front again, and you're thinking, goodness me! And at this point, Arsenal aren't winning either. I was getting a bit carried away at that stage. I tend to do that, and then just for me, it is the frustration of there's it all goes horribly wrong with the passing out from the back. I actually want to ban it, Tom. And I know if Dan Kilpatrick was here and in seasons gone by, he used to say to me, "You're an old man shouting at the clouds. This is the way forward, passing out from the back. When it works, the rewards are so good." I'm sorry, I never bought it at the time. It doesn't work, and that was a critical moment. It's 2-2. Spurs have got to dig deep. And although I totally appreciate the skill that led to them actually converting the opportunity, to give the ball away like that is absolute madness. Let's not do it anymore.
Well, I have to say, I always slightly winced whenever Dan would, say that kind of thing to you in a somewhat disrespectful manner. And but actually, I think you have even more of a valid point this season than you did last season. I'll tell you in a second. I think we should just go for a quick ad break, and I'll tell you why. So Dan would always say, you're an old man shouting at the sky, get with that, get with the modern times. We all play out from the back, blah, 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 blah. But when you look at the way football has adapted generally this season in the Premier League, we've gone backwards, haven't we? We've gone back to the long throws and the long kicks, and football is cyclical. It always has been. Yes, there are certain trends that kind of stick to a certain, modern sports science, and the power of players is different as the days gone by, and obviously the pitches are much better. But there is a cyclical element to it, and I still think when I watch teams take massive risks out from the back. I'm not saying that it's never wrong, and there often can be chances that come from it, but I would not be surprised if the way football goes, that in a couple of years' time they'll scrap it off completely. So managers will start taking less and less risk because games are such on a knife edge now, aren't they? Even more so than ever, with the fact that set pieces are having such a key role in defining games, that to take those kind of risks feels even more foolhardy than it probably was last season. So I was always, like I say, I always felt it was a bit like, well, the classic case of it, when you're in your 20s, you think you know everything. But sometimes experience, there is a valid point there, and last night Romero trying to play out to that ball to Sarr, I think was the wrong decision, and that was a critical goal, wasn't it? I mean, I feel like Spurs responded brilliantly to Vitinha's goal just before half time, which blotted what had been a perfect first half. I said from the beginning that it wasn't boring, but actually, ironically, until Richarlison scored, it was actually quite a dull game, but in a good way from Spurs, given the chaos at the Emirates. The way they limited PSG was really encouraging. Then they get their goal, and you're thinking, wow, this is brilliant. And then they concede, and you think, okay, how's this going to go in the second half? And I know they actually ended up conceding 4 in the second half, but the initial reaction to get a goal back, go 2-1 ahead, was a really good response. But then bang, bang, they were suddenly behind. And that really didn't help them yesterday, did it? It almost didn't give them a chance to really sort of take stock and get themselves back in the game. But and they didn't help themselves by taking an unnecessary risk, I thought.
No, they didn't. But I mean, I also think, to be fair, I mean, Frank talks about layers and identity and all the rest of it, and obviously he was delighted with the reaction last night. And I thought Spurs kept fighting right till the very end. It would not have surprised me if we'd scored a fourth goal. There were chances. They kept going. Of course, actually, PSG ended up with 10 men at the end. That it's crazy to elbow Xavi as their substitute did in the third minute of stoppage time. So that was stupid. But just go back to Romero. Obviously, he's partly responsible for the goal we've just been talking about. Has he got a defence at all for the penalty? I know that the rules now, of course, is if your arm's up at all in an unusual way, you're going to get penalised. I still sometimes feel it's very, very unfair on defenders. But in that instance, was he a bit naive with his body language?
I don't know, it was so near him, wasn't it? It was happened so quickly, but perhaps, I mean, it's just one of those ones where as soon as you look at the competition they're in, you think, oh, it's going to be a penalty. That's one of the frustrations, isn't it? There's a bit of a difference at times between European football and the Premier League, and how they referee it, how they what they give and what they don't give. But having said that, I don't know. His hand is raised. I don't know if there'll be too many complaints. I didn't see Thomas Frank complaining about it at all after the game. If anything, his main complaint was with his team for the goal. The third and fourth goals were the two where he pointed out as being the sort of ones that were really problematic from a defensive point of view. He didn't really make reference to the penalty.
No. Well, these things happen, and you're entitled to have an occasional off game. And obviously, as you say, Romero is suspended for the weekend, but let's say becomes better, bigger, and stronger than ever. I'd like to give a shout out to Jed Spence, who I thought did really well again. Porro, I mean, I really like Pedro Porro, Tom, and he gives his all. He's such a funny player, though, because he could be really good and then really frustrating. Sometimes his delivery is brilliant. Sometimes it's absolutely appalling. But I guess you just have to buy into what makes a player a player. In terms of looking ahead now, I mentioned all the players who are on the bench. And that's it. That interested me because we actually made this point a couple of weeks ago. I think maybe it was Tom A who was saying that in the Champions League, you've got to be bright and clever and innovative when it comes to your team selections, because with 8 matches, you can afford to lose one. And actually, it's important to rest up 1 or 2 players before what now is a critical home game. I think it's fair to say that although there were shoots of encouragement last night, Tom, the next 2 home games, sandwiched by a trip to Newcastle, are really important in the Thomas Frank building process. If they get bad results against both Fulham and Brentford, I do start to worry about the manager's point of view. But the fact that he left Kudos on the bench, Xavi on the bench, Pliny Odobert and Udogi. Xavi in particular. Now, as you've said, because the two youngsters are so impressive, or were so impressive last night, where does that leave our £52 million player going into the weekend? I mean, he's got to start somewhere, hasn't he?
You think so, but so he hasn't started 3 of the 4 Champions League games, I think. So I guess he started Copenhagen and actually was really good. Although Copenhagen were pretty terrible, weren't they? So I don't know how much. And then he came off after Johnson got sent off, so he felt from there. But that was probably his best performance. Didn't start against Arsenal, didn't start against Chelsea, but came on early very quickly because of Bergval's concussion, then got subbed later and had an absolute shocker of a game. He gave the ball away for the goal. So it feels like in some of Frank's biggest games, he hasn't gone with him. So I think it's fair to say he's not, at this point, totally convinced that he's up to speed at best. Maybe it's more than that. Maybe he just doesn't rate him at all, but I doubt that's the case. I just don't think he probably don't think he's quite ready yet. I think for Fulham at home, despite Fulham being often a bit of a tough nut to crack for Spurs, and I remember last season, it was after the 4-0 against Man City, the best performance of Ange's tenure. Fulham at home was the next game. He thought, right, this is the time to kick on. They laboured to a 1-1 draw, and it all went pear-shaped after that, really. So Fulham can be difficult. They've had a bad run, but then they beat Sunderland the other day, so it shows that they can. They've got some good players. And I feel like Xavi, when he's playing well, and he hasn't really sort of hit the proper heights yet at Spurs, but he was starting to play a bit better in the few games he did play before not featuring the last couple of matches, at least from the beginning, has the creativity that might be needed to unlock that Fulham defence, who seem to defend very well against Sunderland. So personally, I would start him. And if you're not starting against Fulham, having not played in the last couple of games, given the sort of high volume of fixtures and the travelling this week, I'm sort of wondering, when are you? And that's when you start really questioning the sort of value of spending that much money on. But hopefully it's just early days in a long and successful career at Tottenham for Xavi Simons.
Well, we all hope that, and it is relatively early days, but every time I watch him, when he does get on the pitch, I see the desire, and he's spoken about how this is the biggest challenge of his career. I almost see him trying too hard. I see him being knocked off the ball. I also see him not getting the ball where he wants it and not necessarily having the players he would like running off him to give him options. So it's not just down to him. But when you have got a £52 million player, you've got to try and find a position for him to make an effect. So that's another challenge for Frank. I mean, I like the way, Tom, that he is very good, I think, in giving the right sort of message, saying last night that he's 1000% sure that he can get a winning team at Tottenham. And obviously, when you've conceded 9 in 2 games and your first remit, which you publicly made clear, was to sort out the defence, and initially he appeared to have sorted out the defence, means that you've still got plenty of problems. So that's why I think these next 2 home games are so important. And I'm still fascinated to see what he feels is his best starting 11. What formation does he want to stick with? We've said that you don't have a same 11 week in, week out. But what Tom Allnutt said to me, or said to us all a few weeks ago, stuck home. Essentially, when a manager comes in, even if the results aren't great, as long as you can see what he is attempting to do, what the long-term plan is, then I think you can sit back and give him an opportunity. And I almost get the slight feeling now that maybe after this very, very parsimonious start to his tenure, he has listened to the supporters a little bit. He realizes that in itself is not enough. Maybe he has to sacrifice a little bit of defensive solidity to provide some further options going forward. And I still do trust in him to find that right balance. But it is intriguing because I don't think any of us realistically have any idea as to what sort of starting 11 he will come up with against Fulham on Saturday night.
Yeah, I think what I want to see in the next few games, apart from obviously wins, because it's really important they go off, and particularly those 2 home games. They can get a result with Newcastle, that's almost more of a bonus. But particularly against Fulham and Brentford, I want to see more of an identity, I suppose. That kind of goes to what you were asking. I still think Spurs fans not really quite sure what a Thomas Frank Tottenham team is. And that's not surprising because of the amount of changes he constantly makes, both to his lineup and his formation. It makes it quite hard to tell consistently what he wants from his team. Now, that in a way, that shouldn't matter. Whatever the formation, whatever the personnel, there should be the same principles should come through in each performance. And he's stressed that. He's talked about, I want them to be aggressive. I want them to show character. I want them to be man-to-man, particularly last night. I want to be in your face. That should be sort of the touch points of a Thomas Frank team. And that's what made his Brentford team so successful and what obviously got him the job in the first place. But I don't think we've seen that much, really, generally, across his time at Spurs. There have been moments, and then so it's been a bit of a hodgepodge of different performances, different attributes, some really bad ones too, and then obviously throw in the sort of massive amount of different players. I mean, for example, there's stats about only, I think, Wolves and Chelsea have used more players in the Premier League this season than Tottenham. Obviously, we talked about the 4-4-2 or 4-2-2 formation yesterday, as opposed to playing 5 at the back, and then he's just done so many different things, which when it works well, is like, this is exactly what Spurs are crying out for, because Andrew was always so wedded to his system. He never adapted. Modern day Premier League, you've got to mix it up. So, I'm not going to use that as a stick to beat him with when, months ago we were against Man City, for example, we were lauding him for it. But what my point is that when it isn't working and it keeps changing and there aren't sort of obvious, consistent stylistic principles throughout all those performances, you're just sort of left going, I'm not really sure what this team is and what it's trying to do, which is the point that Tom was making. And so now we're at a stage where we're 4 months into it, however many games, is it 12 Premier League games? More than enough matches. And yes, there have been injuries. That is part of it. But I think by now and in the coming games, it's fair to start expecting to see what he's going to be all about going forward. And if we're not seeing that next few games, that's when I'm going to be like, why not? Really should be happening by now.
I think you're right. And I think a new manager, I know we live now in an era where you don't get given any time, but you should. And he's, I think, over the first 4 months, had the right to try out different things, to perhaps understand a little more about the culture of Spurs. Because, obviously when you're the Brentford manager, you know about Tottenham, but you don't necessarily appreciate what the fans and ultimately it's got to be about the fans expect, rightly or wrongly. And Spurs fans do expect to be entertained for their team to play the Tottenham way. And I think that's suddenly come home to him. I mean, you'd have to be totally deaf not to realise that after what happened at the Arsenal game in particular and what happened at home to Chelsea a few weeks ago. So I think he is listening. And I think I'm pleased in a way that he's tried this, he's tried that. But you're right. Now the time has come to decide upon a system, to stick with it, to get some players back from injury who hopefully will be able to make that system even stronger and to go into the transfer market in January as well and aid and abet with that. So, yes, the experimental period has happened. Now, if he knows what he's doing, and I still believe he does, we will see some consistency. We'll see more identity. And hopefully we'll see some much better results as well, particularly at home. There is one player I want to ask you about. I suspect you haven't got any great updates before you go to the press conference ahead of the Fulham game. But a lot of my mates last night who are not Spurs fans were going, what is happening with Dominic Solanke? And again, off the back of the international break, I've not heard his name mentioned by anyone. Do we know if he's training on grass? Do we know if there's a practice match for him? And it was our George a couple of weeks ago was hinting that he fears that Solanke might have to go under the knife again. What do we know about our much missed centre forward?
Yeah, poor Dominic Solanke. It's been the most frustrating injury saga, I suppose, of Spurs this season. First of all, I'm not going to be at the press conference because it's happening at 3 o'clock this afternoon on
Oh,
Thursday. I will still be in Paris at that point. But I think our very own George has already hot-footed it back on the Eurostar, so hopefully he'll be there to witness it and ask some challenging questions about Dominic Solanke. But we have asked a fair bit about him. It's getting to the point where Frank just sort of says no, he's not available, which is concerning. So I take you back to before the international break. Might have been the last presser before the international break. I asked, was there a possibility, or can fans be confident that he will play again in 2025, or words to that effect? And Frank wasn't exactly, didn't fill me with optimism about that. He basically said he hopes so. I think Frank is very, very hesitant to try and give any false hope or around Solanke. So let's just take it back. So obviously, Solanke, who already last season missed 2 months after missing hitting a shot back in January and was out for a couple of months, but then finished the season really, really well. And obviously scored the goal against penalty against Frankfurt, played in the final, did really well. Picks up this injury in training again in pre-season, features against Reading for the first half, and I think it was after that when he picks up this ankle problem. He goes on tour, so it's not bad enough not to not even go, but doesn't play at all. He features in a handful of games at the start as a sub off the bench, but then suddenly I think it's the Bournemouth against his former team Bournemouth where he's not seen, and suddenly it doesn't seem to be getting any better. He has an injection, I think, around the first international break. It doesn't really do the trick. He then goes under what was called minor surgery, and the belief at the time was that, or the hope, the quite optimistic hope, optimistic phrase, the quite what's the word? There was
expectation, feeling.
sort of genuine hope around the club that he'd be back after from that surgery and back playing after the October international break. So this is a while ago now. That obviously doesn't happen. Frank then rules him out to at least after the November international break. It was before then that I said, is there a chance of him coming back at the end before 2026 effectively? And he sort of said he hopes so. Since we've had that, we've had a few other press conferences. Matt Verry, who took over from Dan Kirkpatrick at the Standard when Dan moved to the Athletic, asked, "Is there a chance he could have further surgery?" Back to what you were saying about George, and Frank didn't completely rule it out, but he was pretty bullish on thinking that wouldn't be the point. He wouldn't have to. So that is the hope. Again, he's really reticent to sort of be definitive about anything in case it comes back to bite him. But he seemed pretty confident that wasn't going to be the case. So I don't imagine that'll be it. But again, nowhere to be seen. Didn't feature in a practice match, unlike Radi Dragusin, who played half of a practice match in the last international break. And you know what? Now it's 27th of November, going into December. I mean, yeah, at least Kolo Muani's playing well now. I can't really offer you much more than that. Hopefully he'll be back soon. But look, this guy's been out for, if you basically go back from the injury, barring those handful of sub appearances for what's it now? That's 5 months, 4 5 months. I mean, when is he going to be up and playing back to peak form fitness? It feels like a while away. It's a real blow, and for him personally, because it's wide open for. Forget not just about Tottenham, but England. It's wide open to be Harry Kane's backup at the World Cup, isn't it?
No, it's a personal tragedy for him, and it's a huge blow for the club and for Thomas Frank. And again, I think it's sometimes quite useful just to chat to fellow fans who aren't Spurs supporters, and so many have come up to me, and I'm not asking for their opinions, etc., and all going, "What? Why? Why is there this absolute sort of downer on Frank so early?" And I did point out, well, the home form has been awful, and obviously when you play as badly as you have done against both Chelsea and Arsenal, questions are going to be asked. But then you do have to remember that Solanke, your 60+ million pound striker, who never ever used to get injured at Bournemouth, and I appreciate he wasn't playing Saturday, Wednesday, Saturday at Bournemouth, if that's got something to do with why he broke down at Spurs, but to miss him for the whole season, to have missed Kulusevski for the whole season, to be missing Maddison for the whole season, we've got to, I think, keep stressing that. Thomas Frank has, to a degree, been managing with one hand behind his back, but without going to the old business about a bit more transparency regarding injuries. I really hope we learn a bit more about the Solanke situation sooner rather than later, because as well as Richarlison has started to play again with 3 goals in 3 games, and as well as Kolo Muani played last night, you'd have to be mad, I think, to be confident that those two will stay fit for the next
Yeah,
6 months.
I get that. But, I mean, Frank's also made the point a few times about missing those 3 that you mentioned, and also Son, and how the 4 of them were the sort of key pillars of Spurs attack last season. But it's a bit the same as Ange last season. It's like after a while, people don't really want to hear it. Like they continue to be completely valid reasons or excuses, but fans soon tire of hearing the same thing over and over again. And he's got to find a way. That's just how it works with management. You've got to find a different way. I still look at the recruitment and feel like they made a mistake in the summer, not signing another creative midfielder, because they were after one before Maddison got injured. You knew Maddison was going to be out for pretty much the whole season, at least from a sort of peak form point of view. Even if he might not even play, who knows? But he's probably going to be nowhere near, the Maddison we know, at least this season. And then that's before you even go on to the Xavi Simons debate and whether he was a clever signing or not.
Yes, that's
So I
a
feel for
debate
Frank in that sense.
Yeah, and that Xavi debate is one I think we'll continue to have for a while now, and hopefully we can elaborate upon it after a stunning performance from a starting position against Fulham at the weekend. Last point, Tom. I mean, I don't know if there's any truth in these rumours. I said last night that occasionally I was looking into the dugout and expecting to see Ange Postecoglou having kidnapped Thomas Frank earlier in the day. Liverpool slumped to another horrendous defeat against PSV, or as I'm constantly told when I'm doing the highlight show, we've got to call them PSV. And I mean, honestly, the names are changing all the time here. Apparently, we're going to have to call Wales Cymru soon. You get a rap on the knuckles if you don't say check it, if you don't say Turkey, if you don't say Praha instead of Prague. Anyway, I don't want to sound like a dinosaur. If that's the way forward, that's the way forward. But the point I'm making is that I have read a couple of reports indicating that Ange Postecoglou has supporters stroke admirers in the background at Anfield, and we know he grew up supporting Liverpool. Is it conceivable that by the time Liverpool come to Tottenham in late December, Postecoglou could be back in the Premier League?
Wow, that would be an amazing story. I haven't seen any of these reports. I'd love to see where these reports have come from. I will do my best to try and find out, perhaps.
Please.
I mean, I'm a big Ange fan, as anyone who's followed this podcast for a long time knows. So just purely from a journalist point of view, I think it's box office. So I'd love to see him back in the Premier League. And you could argue with a team like Liverpool, that's actually where he might flourish, because it feels like he needs the best players, doesn't it? I mean, it's easy to say a manager needs the best players, but his style of football, when it works, really requires, the best players to carry it out, as we saw at Celtic, and that's where we saw it fall down at Tottenham. But, if they're going to make a change with Slot, it's understandable, given it just seems to be getting worse, which is mad, really, because they obviously won the league not that long ago. But, I mean, Ange, with what happened at Forest... I mean, he's counting his lucky stars to get another job in the Premier League anytime soon. I really do feel like if he's got a chance, and I think it's a pretty slim one at that anyway, of ever coming back to manage over here, as much as I'd love to see it, he's going to have to go and rebuild his reputation at another European club to earn that opportunity. But, I mean, yeah, that'd be amazing.
I mean, this is not obviously a Liverpool podcast, but we all are invested in Ange and always will be. And I was talking to a very passionate Liverpool supporter last night who was slumping his head more and more as they went down to, I think it was their equal heaviest home defeat in Europe. 4-1. It's made them, they're on their worst run, I think, for 71 years. So they lost 9 of the last 12. And I said, okay, well, if you sack Slot, who comes in. And he came up with two suggestions. He said, well, they'd like to get Jurgen Klopp back for the rest of this season just to steady the ship, or bring in Ange for the rest of the season, get the feel-good factor going again, and then see where they are come the summer. I'm thinking, yes, actually do that, please. It would be a lot of fun, but those reports may be slightly misguided. Anyway, listen, Tom, thanks very much for your company. What are you going to go gallivanting around Paris now? I see you're skipping the press conference this afternoon.
Skipping. I didn't realise it'd be Thursday, to be fair. Yeah, maybe. I've got a bit of work to do, but then maybe we may go see the Louvre and see what's still hanging there after the robbery that happened a few weeks ago. But yeah, no, nice to, very lucky position I get to be in. Get to come to
Yeah.
this place. So,
Well,
get a chance,
don't try and shove the Mona Lisa in your rucksack. But safe travels home, and our attention turns to Fulham on Saturday evening. Of course, we'll be back after that, hopefully to react to a stirring home performance. We are certainly overdue one of those. That's Tom Barclay in Paris for The Sun. I am Marcus Buckland, as always. Come on, you Spurs.